Trials of Silence by TheBeckster, Chapter 10, 24 Weeks. The air was heavily somber as Anakin sat down across from Obi-Wan at breakfast. Her friend looked tired and worn out, judging by the heavy bags under his eyes and the listless way he picked at his food. He hadn't slept much in several days. Trying to hold a conversation with him was like trying to talk to a wall. He might have been there physically, but mentally, Obi-Wan was on the opposite side of the galaxy, or perhaps down in the temple brig. "Here," she said, pushing a fresh cup of caf under Obi-Wan's nose. "You need this more than I do." Obi-Wan sat up, staring down at the steaming cup before fixing his former apprentice with a stern look. "You're not supposed to be drinking caf, Anakin. The caffeine isn't good for you." Anakin gave him a half smile. He might be zoned out and half asleep, but he could still pull up a lecture when he needed to. "I swear I haven't touched this stuff in months," she chuckled. "But you looked like you needed a cup." Obi-Wan blinked and attempted a smile. "Thank you," he said, bringing the cup to his lips. Anakin let him get a few sips in, taking several bites of her food before prodding him for information. "What's going to happen to Vos?" Obi-Wan drew a tired breath and released it slowly. "Do I want to know how you know this is about him?" "This hypersensitivity does have its uses," she explained with a shrug. "I sensed Quinlan almost as soon as he got back. He's a mess emotionally, and the fact that he was taken to a cell, I put the pieces together." Obi-Wan took a long drink from his cup. "I really can't discuss it." "Will it be discussed at the council meeting this morning?" "Yes, but it's not a meeting you will be sitting in on." "So it's a trial then?" Obi-Wan didn't have to respond. Anakin grew silent, remembering the last trial the council had. Just under a year had passed. Anakin wished, and not for the first time, that she knew where Ahsoka was. She knew the young Togruta was more than capable of taking care of herself in any corner of the galaxy, but that was what concerned her most. Ahsoka was overcapable, and undoubtedly she had turned around and thrown herself right back into the war almost as soon as she had left the Order. There hadn't been any reports of people seeing the former Padawan, but that hardly meant she wasn't out there. Anakin knew her apprentice far too well to expect her to just go home and live a peaceful civilian life. Anakin drew a long breath and pushed away the thoughts. "When is the trial starting?" Obi-Wan checked the time. "Soon." He pushed away his half-eaten breakfast and drained the rest of his caf. Anakin hurriedly finished her last couple bites so she was ready when Obi-Wan stood up. She might not be allowed in the trial, but at the very least she could accompany her friend to the chambers. They didn't speak much on their walk. Obi-Wan was preoccupied, and his worry hung over him like a storm cloud. Anakin didn't encourage conversation and opted for silent support. There wasn't anything she could offer that would make the upcoming trial easier on Obi-Wan anyway. Obi-Wan slowed to a stop outside the chamber doors. The other council members filed past them somberly. They would have a few minutes to discuss the trial with each other before the accused was brought before them. "Is the Chancellor expecting you today, Anakin?" "No. He is making diplomatic visits to the core planets today." Obi-Wan nodded and glanced back at the chamber doors. He was the last council member to enter, and the others were waiting on him. Anakin had to ask before he disappeared. "How serious is this trial, Obi-Wan?" She had heard rumors of what Vos had done over the past several months. He had broken the code multiple times. He had committed unforgivable acts against the Jedi and the Republic. He had failed his mission. Obi-Wan had been witness to several of these failings. She was morbidly curious to see how far a Jedi could fall without being expelled. Much to the council has it in mind to expel him, Obi-Wan stated somberly, but that still stands to be determined. I see, Anakin nodded. She sensed a group approaching the chambers with a sense of purpose, several temple guards and Vos. They're coming. You should get inside. She nudged her former master away. I will come find you after the trial, Obi-Wan said before turning into the room. Anakin turned to walk away, but stopped short a few steps from the doors. Curiosity kept her hanging around for another minute. She wanted to see Quinlan Vos. She wanted to see what a fallen Jedi looked like. She stepped aside as the group approached. The temple guards were impossible to read beneath their masks, and nearly blank Force presence. She paid them little regard as they did her. Vos, on the other hand, Anakin had never seen the Jedi look so defeated. Usually, the Kifar walked around with his shoulders squared, head held high, a confident, almost arrogant swagger in her steps. He certainly wasn't one for demure postures, slumped shoulders, bowed head, and trudging feet. The group drew level with Anakin, and Quinlan lifted his gaze to see who was watching him. Anakin saw recognition and then great confusion pass over his face as they passed. He craned his neck to stare at her until they walked into the chambers. Anakin suppressed a sigh, realizing belatedly that she wasn't wearing her outer robe. By 6 months, she was clearly showing without the voluminous outer robe to cover things up. She walked away, dreading the inevitable conversation with Vos about this. Maybe she could just avoid him for forever, or even better, he'd be expelled and he wouldn't have an opportunity to hunt her down. Anakin immediately felt guilty for wishing for Vos' banishment. If he could get away with what he did and remain a Jedi, then she should be safe too. For her sake, he needed to be exonerated. The trial took the entire morning and bled into early afternoon. Anakin and Obi-Wan were supposed to meet Padme for lunch at 1, and by noon there still had been no sign that the trial was reaching completion. She could just go and have lunch alone with her husband, but Obi-Wan had had a few rough weeks. He needed a short break. Anakin had tried to avoid making too many accidental trips past the trial chambers. It wasn't like there was a chrono on the door that counted down time remaining, and she wouldn't be able to sense anything going on in there. She would just have to wait it out. That didn't stop her from wandering past once every hour or so to check. When the trial finally did wrap up, shortly after 12:30, she was actually making a legitimate trip from the archives to her room. The shortest route past the chambers. She half smiled as she approached Obi-Wan and Plo Koon. They were feeling far too relieved and happy for the trial to have ended in Vos' expulsion. There you are, she called out with a smile. You took so long I was afraid I'd have to meet Senator Anidala for lunch by myself. Yes, I'm sure you would have suffered every moment of lunch alone with the senator, Obi-Wan stated dryly, but with a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. So the rumors are true. Anakin suppressed a grimace. She recognized that voice, and the speaker had regained much of his confidence if his tone was anything to go by. She forced a neutral expression as Quinlan Vos joined their small group. His eyes were on Anakin, primarily her stomach. You really did go and get yourself knocked up. It wasn't exactly my choice, Anakin muttered, crossing her arms tightly. How long do you have? She saw Quinlan's hand reaching out and knew exactly what he was trying to do. She grabbed his wrist with her right hand and pulled it away from its trajectory. Do not, she growled, her only warning before dropping the offending hand. Vos drew his hand back and looked away. Right, sorry. Anakin tried to be somewhat sympathetic. He had had an incredibly rough time over the past several months. If half of the rumors were true, he was probably still reeling not only from Dooku's torture, but from the loss of Ventress as well. It didn't give her the patience to let people touch her without permission, but she wasn't going to hold it against him for too long either. Fortunately, Plo Koon had a much higher tolerance threshold for Vos than either Obi-Wan or Anakin. The Keldor stepped forward and laid a hand on Quinlan's shoulder. Come, Vos, you must be hungry. Let's get some food and I will help you begin complying a complete report of your mission. Good idea. I could eat an entire bantha, Vos laughed, breaking the awkward tension. He turned to Anakin and gave her a nod, and then he turned to Obi-Wan. Skywalker, Kenobi. The two departed and Obi-Wan turned to Anakin. We should go meet the senator. Are you ready? Anakin began walking the way she had originally been going. I just need my robe. Tell me about the trial. Obi-Wan began retelling Quinlan's mission, more than happy to share now that the trial was complete and Vos was exonerated. Anakin only half listened. She knew most of the broad detail, and Obi-Wan wouldn't be able to go into the finer point until the full report was completed. She retrieved her robe and they turned toward a speeder bay. Anakin was surprised to find there was a growing lightness in her heart the longer Obi-Wan talked. She felt hopeful. Of all the things Vos had done over his mission, even though it had failed horribly and he had indeed fallen to the dark side, he was still a Jedi, on probation and watched carefully, but still a Jedi Knight. Anakin's step faltered and she fell behind Obi-Wan. She paused for a brief moment, using the wall for support as she rubbed at her stomach. A short, sharp pain had rippled across her belly and caught her a bit off guard. She wasn't concerned. They had been bothering her for a good part of the morning. Okara had said the Braxton Hicks could happen at any time, but they were harmless and should pass quickly. They were, however, seriously annoying. If she had to deal with these sneaking up on her randomly for the next 3 months, she was going to lose her mind. Obi-Wan only went a few steps before he noticed Anakin's delay. He turned around and saw Anakin leaning against the wall, rubbing her stomach and grimacing in discomfort. He immediately panicked. What's wrong? What happened? Are you alright? Anakin waved him off, trying to stand up straight. It's nothing, just a contraction. You're having contractions? Obi-Wan hissed. And you didn't say anything? Anakin blinked, confused. No, why would I? They've been happening all morning. Obi-Wan spluttered for a moment before he lashed out and grabbed Anakin's wrist. I'm taking you to the medbay, he declared, marching off, tracking a confused Anakin behind him. I can't believe you didn't take yourself when it started. Anakin, how criffing stupid can you get? Anakin belatedly realized why he was reacting so poorly. No, wait, it's not like that. They're not real contractions, she tried to explain. Obi-Wan was beyond hearing her protests. She sighed and resigned herself to an unnecessary trip to the infirmary, if that's what it took to calm Obi-Wan down. Obi-Wan marched into the infirmary with Anakin trotting behind him. He practically shouted at the Padawan that approached them to go find Master Chi, while he pushed Anakin down onto a bed. Don't yell at him, Anakin snapped at her old master, finally snatching her wrist back. She gave the apprentice an apologetic look. If you could find Master Chi, please, Obi-Wan needs to see her, she finished with a smirk. The Padawan scurried away, utterly terrified of this sudden personality switch between Skywalker and Kenobi. He was going to find Master Chi and then find somewhere else to work for a while. Anakin waited patiently for Vocara, studying her nails, stretching her ankles. She did note that sitting down had made the discomfort pass much quicker than it had earlier this morning. "You know we're going to be late for lunch," she commented, trying to lighten the mood a bit. Obi-Wan didn't answer the words, but his sharp glare told her he thought she seriously needed to reconsider her priorities. He alternated between anxiously pacing around the bed and standing with his arms tightly crossed. Anakin was certain he was preparing a sketching lecture for whenever Vocara did show up. It took her a whole 3 minutes. Obi-Wan greeted her with an impatient, "Well, it's about time." Vocara shot Obi-Wan a cool look over her datapad. "Skywalker, what are you doing here again?" she asked, clearly unconcerned. She didn't even bother looking up from her datapad at Anakin. Anakin shrugged nonchalantly, echoing Chi's lack of concern and sheer boredom. "I had Braxton Hicks, my wise master, here panicked." She couldn't help but end with another smirk. Oh, this was turning into pure gold. She was never going to let Obi-Wan live this down. The Twi'lek healer sighed and lowered her datapad. "Did anything feel different?" "Nope." Obi-Wan spluttered some more, looking between the two, his arms dangling loosely at his side. A look of pure confusion covered his face. "Good, you can go." She then turned to Obi-Wan and gave him a hard, stern look. "Master Kenobi, I have a datapad you may find enlightening. I suggest you read it and stop yelling at my Padawan." She turned sharply and walked to her office. Anakin couldn't contain anymore. She dissolved into a fit of laughter. "This isn't funny, Anakin. I was worried about you." "I'm sorry, Master," she managed between laughs. "But I tried to tell you." She looked at Obi-Wan. He was thoroughly displeased. She broke down again. It was a minute before she could talk again. "I just can't believe you panicked that much. You yelled at a Padawan. You swore. I didn't think you had it in you." She roared in laughter again. This was certainly going to be something she'd never let him live down. Anakin had contained herself to some chuckles by the time Vocara returned with the datapad. The healer forced it into Obi-Wan's hands. "Everything you need to know about human pregnancy and childbirth. Happy reading," she stated dryly. "Now stop taking up bed space and get out of my med bay." Anakin caught one good look at the horrified expression on Obi-Wan's face. She howled in laughter. Obi-Wan's face flushed bright red, and he tucked the datapad into his robes. He did offer an apology to Vocara before she walked away. Anakin, still trembling with silent laughter, interrupted by only the occasional chuckle now, stood up on laughter-shaken legs. She clung to Obi-Wan's arm for support in case another fit of laughter decided to hit her. This time, she steered him out of the med bay. "Oh, thank you for that. I haven't laughed that hard in ages," she giggled, wiping away the tears gathered in the corner of her eyes. Obi-Wan sighed and bowed his head. "You're never going to let me live this down, are you?" "Never, ever," Anakin chuckled. "This is one I'm definitely telling the kids. I'll be sure to remind you of it when you're on your deathbed." You think you're going to outlive me?" Obi-Wan shot back, a mixture of irritation and humor in his voice. "With the way you fly? Please," he scoffed. Anakin giggled a few more times as they made their way to the speeder bay. They picked the speeder, Anakin drove, and pulled out into Coruscant's air traffic. They were halfway to the restaurant before Anakin spoke again. "You know we're going to have to explain to Padme why we're late." Obi-Wan dropped his head into his hand and heaved an over-exaggerated sigh. "I'm glad you're having such a good day, Anakin." he muttered flatly, but Anakin could sense that he wasn't as put off as he seemed. Lunch was at Dex. It was actually Padme's choice. He had been stressed recently and just wanted some junk food. Anakin wasn't complaining. She'd been dealing with cravings for deep fried anything for a couple weeks now. The two Jedi wandered in and waved to the basilisk cook back in the kitchen. The diner was still crowded as the lunch rush ended, but Padme had found a booth in the back corner. I was beginning to think I had been stood up, Padme joked as the Jedi slid into the booth. Sorry, we're late, but Obi-Wan had a medical emergency. Anakin couldn't help but smirk. Is everything alright? Padme asked, immediately concerned. As soon as he asked, a waitress came over to their table. Anakin was barely containing her laughter. Padme was giving his wife disapproving looks for laughing at something that was obviously a discomfort to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan waited until after she had taken their drink order before responding. Well, Anakin seems quite entertained by it. I'm sure she'd be happy to share the story. Anakin began recounting the earlier Braxton Hicks episode. Obi-Wan was quite impressed that she made it through the entire story before she completely broke down laughing again. While Anakin laughed, Padme reached a hand across the table and placed it on Obi-Wan's arm in a show of solidarity. She did the same thing to me last week. We were discussing Gerald. I called in a med droid before I calmed down enough to realize what was going on. Padme glared at his wife as her laughter redoubled as she remembered the incident. I'm surprised she didn't tell you. Apparently, it's a good story. I've been off planet. She hasn't had time. Obi-Wan flipped through the menu and furrowed his brow. Dex had a few dishes he always ordered. But today, everything sounded good. Apparently, Padme was facing the same dilemma because after a minute of looking, he sighed and set the menu down. I can't decide. Everything sounds good. He looked across to Anakin. I feel like I'm the pregnant one. Is this what it's like for you? Anakin shrugged, not bothering with the menu. Pretty much. She had already made up her mind. Padme looked down at the menu again. There are some things that I know I don't like, but I still want to eat them. It feels like I'm having cravings. He looked up again. Is that even possible? Can a person get sympathy cravings? Both he and Obi-Wan fixed Anakin with a semi-critical stare. Don't look at me. I already know what I want. Anakin shot back defensively. This is on you two. She looked away and took a long drink. Anakin, both men stated unconvinced. What? Are you using the Force to project your cravings onto others? Padme accused lightly. What? No. Anakin scoffed. At least I don't think I am. She looked at Obi-Wan. Am I? Is that a thing I can do? Obi-Wan shrugged helplessly. When you're involved, who knows, Anakin? Anakin frowned slightly and focused on herself for a moment. Did that fix anything? Padme looked at the menu. No, he sighed. Maybe it's just us. Obi-Wan voiced the same response a moment later. After a few more minutes of staring at the menu, the waitress returned, and Padme and Obi-Wan were forced to make a decision. Lunch passed in a happy cloud of good conversation, good food, and Anakin sneakily stealing food from the others' plates. Anakin! Padme tried to stab at her hand with his fork, but she drew it away too quickly, with her prize in her fingers. You have your own food, he chided, pulling the plate out of her reach. But I'm still hungry, she mockingly complained, using the Force to lift another fried morsel into her hands. How can you still be hungry? Obi-Wan asked, exasperated. You've had 2 entrees. Hey, I'm growing 2 whole people. Anakin snapped, snatching a bite from Obi-Wan's plate. You should give it a try and see how much you eat. Padme sighed, rolled his eyes, and pushed his plate towards Anakin, barely containing his smile. He was full anyway. He never really ate junk food all that often, and his meal was already sitting heavily in his stomach. He couldn't believe Anakin was still hungry. Then again, he wasn't pregnant. Her metabolism could probably handle it. He missed being 23. A minute later, Obi-Wan pushed his unfinished plate toward Anakin as well. End of chapter.